I love May. Although spring is already here, this is when you really start to notice that it is actually spring. Temperatures are a lot warmer. It was 18 degrees in my flat yesterday. And although sunshine isn't consistent, you tend to get sun in the mornings, which is nice, and it'll go off a bit, and then you tend to get sun in the evenings. So it's really nice. And the other thing that I really love is that the temperatures have warmed up just enough where I don't need to use my hot water bottle anymore. Which is great because that saves me money. That's even less gas I'm using now. Fantastic. So I'm watching everything blooming outside. In fact, the blossom trees have already finished here. It seems to have gone really fast this year. But consistent sunshine or consistently higher temperatures, which means I've got my windows open every day now. And sometimes right until the evening already. It's fantastic. It just makes me feel so much better. I feel my creativity coming back. I've been in the studio making some of my handmade jewellery, and I'm thinking about making some more dresses because I've noticed that my creativity and my energy is really closely linked to the seasons. And I think a lot of that is because my heating is very restricted. I notice the temperature differences more because I'm having to be self-sufficient with jumpers and hot water bottles and things. So when that temperature does change and I don't need those things anymore, it really makes me buoyant. My mental energy improves, my physical energy improves. I want to be out more. The windows are open, which I love. I'm growing things on my windowsills and out in my little pot garden, which makes me really happy because I've got my tomatoes are growing good now, and I've got all sorts of other little things sprouting, and it's just such fun. It just makes me feel so much better. So May is the good month. I've not been buying as much in the supermarket lately. I'm trying to stick to my new policy of only buying food with loyalty points, cashback apps, and gift cards that I make from surveys. So it means that I can't go in and browse as often as I like, especially with Morrison's where I don't get that many gift cards. I've got one that's processing at the moment, but if I go into Morrison's and I see great deals there and I haven't got a gift card, I still want to buy it anyway. So this happened yesterday. I went in yesterday just for a little nose around because I was out having a walk and enjoying the sunshine, and I bought 2 heads of broccoli, 2 big bags of self-raising flour, and a punnet of tomatoes, which came to, I think it was £2.74, but I had to buy it on my card. So I've actually physically spent £2.74 already this month, and we're only in the first week of May. So I'm going to try and do better. I have other things that I need to buy, like I need to get a new tub of cooking margarine for baking, and I have some Tesco gift cards. So I'm going to try and put together enough of a reason to drive to Tesco, because there isn't a Tesco in walking distance for me, and I'm going to go and get that, because that's an expensive thing. Well, I get those big 2 kilogram tubs which lasts me months, but they cost like £3 or £4 now. And I had a look in Morrison's at their biggest version the other day, and it's like £3.50, and it's not even a big tub. So I'll probably go and get that in Tesco's with a gift card, because at least if it is a little bit more expensive, I'm not actually paying for it. Still juggling prices. Prices are still climbing. Oh, it's just an absolute nightmare. I'm trying to be really good, and I'm seeing gaps in my freezer now. But I'm being really careful about how much I cook and what I cook, and it's not going down too far. So I've still got quite a lot of veg in my freezer from where I've been, buying it fresh and then freezing it because I've bought a lot at once. So I've got quite a lot going. So I'm not going to starve to death anytime soon. One of my tasks this week is to finalise getting organised for my car camping trip, which I still hope is happening next week. The weather's looking a little bit iffy, but it's very similar to where I am here. I'm not that far away really, it's only about 2.5 hours. So I'm hoping everything goes ahead as it is supposed to. I'm really putting together some of the food items that I'm going to be taking. Now I won't have cooking facilities and it's only going to be for 2 nights. So it's very much going to be pre-packaged. There's a lot of carbs. There's not going to be much of anything else. One of the good things is that where I am going there is a big Tesco's, and I do have some Tesco gift cards to use, so I will probably pop in there and get some fruit or anything else that I feel like I am missing. But I'm not going to be eating a lot on this trip. I think I'm going to be quite busy, and it's nice to get a bit more exercise and just change the routine a bit. So what I'm taking is this really big cool box. I got this from a free Freegal site last year, and it's been fantastic. It fits perfectly in the front footwell of my car, and I can just fill it up with whatever I need. So I've just bunged a few things in here which I need. So I have my thermos cup, which was free, which I found in the street not so long ago. I have my new little kettle, which takes an age to heat up. We'll see how we get on with that. Now, a lot of the stuff that I'm taking is food that I've got on cashback apps, freebies and yellow stickers. I keep a break glass snack bag, things like that. So there's quite a few things like that in there. So for instance, these which I bought last year, which are going to be perfect for snacking. There was a cashback deal going on cereal, so I have about 4 boxes of these, so one of those will be fine. Milkology, this is great. This is long life milk, so I don't need a fridge, so that will do the job fine for 2 nights. Snacks, I have all sorts of yellow sticker snacks, so I'm taking one of these and one of these and one of these. I'm going to be so sugared up to the eyeballs on this trip, it's ridiculous. I also have some of these things. They're alright, they're not amazing, but when you're out on the road and you just want a little fun snack while you're sitting around, or you just wanted to fill a gap, they're perfect actually, and they last really well. I've also, last year I acquired loads of, they were doing free offers on canned drinks. Now I'm not really a fizzy drink person, but these are really nice. They're like mineral water, lightly flavoured. So bearing in mind I'm not going to have a lot of drink options while I'm away. I don't take alcohol for a start. These are a great little addition, and these will, if I don't use them, I don't use them. In here, my little Tupperware box, I have tea bags, some all-in-one coffee, which a friend gifted to me. She's a coffee connoisseur and didn't like them, but I think these are just going to be fine for what is basically going to be 2 mornings. I only generally drink coffee in the morning, but I've taken about 6 of these because I might find that while I'm out and about on the road that these are going to be a nice little addition. I also need to take water, so I tend to hoard lemonade bottles. If I fill up, say 3 of those, 2 or 3 of those, that will last me because I only need the water. I have a drinks bottle I'm going to take with me when I'm out on walks, but it's literally going to be tea and coffee. I don't want to drink too much if I can help it, because one of the big problems with being out on the road is toilet stops. Now I have a great app called I think it's called the Great British Toilet Map. I'll link it below, and I will probably refer to it while I'm away as well, which will pinpoint on the map wherever you are the nearest public toilets, and it'll tell you on there what the facilities are. If it's free, it'll give you the address. I used it last year for a couple of trips out, and it was absolutely brilliant. And if you find any of the information is wrong, you can add to it, so you can adjust it. So that's what I've packed so far. I've also finished off the last of my curtains, and I've worked out how I'm going to pad out the back of my car so that it's reasonably comfortable. I'm basically going to steal all the cushions and the seats off my sofas. I have a very small back of car, but even if I can't stretch out, and I'm only 5'3", 5'4", but at least if it's not hard, I'll probably manage for 2 nights. We'll see how we go. Anyway, so that's roughly what I've packed so far. It's not everything. I'm also going to bake a loaf of soda bread, and I'm going to take a jar, I think I'm going to take a jar of homemade jam, that'll be blackberry, and a jar of peanut butter, and I think that will probably be all the food I'm going to take, to be honest with you. As I say, I've got a Tesco's very near me for most of my trip, and I have gift cards to use, so that means I'm not going to spend any extra money. The only money I'm planning to spend while I'm away is going to be petrol. I'm going to fill up before I go, and looking at my trip and adding up the mileage, I don't think I'm going to need to fill up, because my car will do about 350 miles on a tank, depending on the types of driving that I'm doing. So I'm hoping that I won't have to fill up while I'm away. And again, I have the Tesco, there's a petrol station. I'm going to manage fine. So I'm also going to do a little bit of recording of me sorting out the car. That will be a bit closer to the trip because I've got a few days to go, and then you can see how I'm going to muddle along with sleeping in the back of a tiny 3-door hatchback. Today, and as I mentioned previously, the only serious food prep that I'm doing for my car camping trip is making some bread. It's really quick and simple, and anything that I don't eat will just come home with me. So I love this soda bread recipe. It's the easiest bread in the world to make. So I think I've probably done this on an upload before, but I can't remember. So I'm going to do it now anyway because it fits in with what I'm doing. So first off, I have 1 pound of, I'm using strong bread flour that came from Morrison's, because look, it was on a yellow sticker and I've had this since last year. 29p. So that goes in first. You need a teaspoon of bicarb. So let's find a teaspoon there. Shake that in there. And then you need a teaspoon of salt as well. And that goes. Give that a bit of a stir around to mix it all in. And then you need 500 mils of buttermilk. I don't bother with buttermilk. Buttermilk itself is expensive. If you have normal milk at home, any kind of dairy milk, you can just pop a splash of vinegar in with it, leave it for 15 minutes, and that makes buttermilk. Or I use whatever I've got, and I'm drinking quite a lot of oat milk at the moment, not because it's a preference, but because I get them really, really cheap on the cashback apps. So I'm just going to throw in pretty much whatever I've got. So that one needs juicing up, and now that was the minor figures one. They're really nice, the minor figures ones, actually. And now I'm moving on to Milkology. The barista one is my favourite. It's really nice in coffee, as you would expect. It's got a better flavour than some of the other ones, but when you're getting them for 50p or free, who cares? You just use whatever you use. So I'm not actually going to put in 500 ml because I tend to find it's too much. And I end up with a really wet bread, and then I end up having to add more and more flour, and I'm trying to save money. So I've actually put 400 ml in there. So I'm going to make a well in the middle. I'll probably make a mess. I make a mess of everything. And I'm just going to pour it straight in. And in fact, I'm not even going to put all of that in because I'm unsure that I need it all. seems to come out extra wet, and then I don't like adding loads and loads and loads of extra flour because it's then costing me money. Okay, we do need a little bit more of that. And I'd rather scrimp on ingredients and save money and end up with something that I can still eat and go all the way. Yeah, so that's fine. I've not needed all of that, so I reckon I'm probably putting in about 350 millilitres of milk rather than the full 500. I don't know why, that's just how it works out when I'm doing it. It might be the type of bread flour I'm using. They recommend whole wheat for this particular recipe, but I just put in whatever's brown of any description, purely because it's whatever I can get on a yellow sticker. Okay, so now I'm going to knead it. Now you don't need to knead it for very long. It's really quick and simple. Don't go mad on it. So sprinkle a little bit of that out onto there. Out comes bread. A bit more of that on because it is, again, still quite damp. And now I'm just going to knead it, and the extra flour that's on the table will help that to dry out a little bit. I love making bread. I don't do it that often actually, because the problem is when I make it is that I then just eat it. As soon as it comes out the oven, I cut the end off hot, cover it in crunchy peanut butter, and I'm in absolute heaven. So I fear that this loaf may end up the same, which is why I'm making it very close to when I'm going away, because frankly this is holiday food and I'm not supposed to be eating it before I go. And I realise that I'm probably not doing this entirely the correct way, but I don't care. All my recipes are as close to budget as I can possibly do, and as long as it comes out okay, honestly, it really doesn't matter. Don't be fussy about it. It's whatever tastes good to you. I don't have anyone to impress except my own stomach, and to be honest with you, I'm not a fussy eater. I love food, I love trying new food, I love flavour, but I'm not a fussy eater. Right now, the way things are, I'm just grateful for anything I can get. So there we are. That's it. It's ready to go in the oven. Make it into a nice round. Maybe you can see that. I made a nice round. Right, so that's that. Oh, a mess. I need to get my little baking tray, and I'm going to cut a little bit of parchment for this, just to stop it sticking. I've got a piece almost ready to go there. And I'll do a big fuss, just to stop it sticking to the bottom. In it goes. So you can just see there. Now I'm just going to cut all that on the top so that it splits. And now that's going to go into the oven for about 40 minutes at 200 degrees. I have a fan oven, electric fan oven, so that's 200 or thereabouts Celsius, something like that. I just turn the dial. I'll link to the recipe below because this is just the best bread recipe ever. So I'm going to make that up, and then I will pack that away in my cool box with all the other stuff, and then we'll be ready. It's only a couple of days till I go. The weather's turned a bit damp. As long as it doesn't rain, I don't care. I don't mind. It's not that cold now. We're up to like 16, 17, 18 degrees during the day, and as long as it's not blowing a hoolie and it's not really raining, I'll be fine. Very light misty rain I can cope with. I've got an umbrella, you know, it's British, I'm used to living in the north. But so long as it isn't stair rods, I'll be fine, because everything that I'm doing when I'm up in Scotland is going to be outdoors. And I need the weather to be reasonable. So fingers crossed for that. Earlier this year, or it might even have been the end of last year, I forget now, the days and the weeks and the months seem to blur, I saw a book recommendation on another YouTube channel, and I don't always get books out, and I don't buy books, I always go to the library. So it also depends on what I can get, because not all the books I want to read are available at the library. But I managed to get this particular book, and this is the book. It's called English Pastoral by a chap called James Rebanks. It's not his only book, but this resonated with me because James Rebanks was brought up amongst traditional farming communities. His father was a farmer, his grandfather was a farmer, farming back in the 1930s, all around that time. So he learnt a lot of very old ways of how you farm. It's not like today. Farming was very much done in harmony with the land back then. It was a much slower experience, and there was a lot more care involved. It was less about profits. It was about living and eating and working with the land and with nature. And we've lost all that. I mean, the agricultural industry as it exists now has just bleeding the countryside dry. But the other reason that I particularly like this is that it's set in... It's not a fictional book. It's pretty much autobiographical. He's writing about, in this particular book, his childhood growing up with his father and his grandfather, and about everything that he learned and experienced through them, growing up as a young farming son and grandson. And it's set up in the Lake District in Cumbria, what is now Cumbria, what used to be Cumberland. And it resonates with me because that's where a lot of my ancestors came from. The trip that I'm about to do up to Scotland is where it starts, but Cumbria as it is now is only a short distance away, and we might think of the Scottish border as being a hard border, and back when the Romans built Hadrian's Wall it was, but since then, I mean, we're talking, you know, so many years ago since the Romans built Hadrian's Wall. But I've noticed through doing my own family tree research that there was a lot of to and froing between the Scottish borders and Cumberland. So I have lots of family where the children have grown up, they've gone into service, they've gone over the border, they've married there, maybe they come back and they retire, or they bring up their families in Scotland. Lots and lots of toing and froing. So a lot of my Scottish borders ancestry did end up migrating into Cumberland, and it's not the Lake District, but it is that whole feel. And a lot of my ancestors were living very hand-to-mouth existences as farmers, as agricultural labourers and as husbandmen. So looking after farmers, you may be looking after sheep or cattle. So a lot of what I see here is fairly reminiscent. I mean, agriculture definitely changed in, say, the 20s, 30s and 40s, and I see a lot of my ancestors leaving the agricultural life to go to the big cities. A lot of them go over to Newcastle and Gateshead. Some of them end up in Hull, Kingston upon Hull, and the new generations abandon that way of life and end up actually going into just as hard existences, because a lot of them became dockers, dock labourers, very dangerous lifestyles, but probably slightly better money, and they were probably just doing what they thought was best for their families. So this has been a really interesting book, and it's really nice to read this just before I'm about to go up to the borders, because these are the kinds of lives that my ancestors would have been living. I mean, I'm going back a lot further. I am looking at my ancestry from predominantly from the 1820s onwards. But those farming lives wouldn't have changed a great deal. Yes, there were tractors and combine harvesters and things like that, but a lot of the ways were still carried down into the 20s, the 30s and the 40s. And it's just been a great read. I wanted to read a small section of it because it really resonates with me living what I consider to be quite a frugal lifestyle for the modern age. And this section comes from page 83. And James is talking about his granddad and granddad's friend George, who they get the Sunday papers and they'd sit around the fire, around the hearth in the cottage on Sunday, and they put the world to rights. And he sits there and observes how they're just living their very simple existences, looking after the farm, looking after the animals, and just getting on with things. So I'm going to read a section here, which I really love, and I hope that you get something from it too. So he says, "They ignored the incomers to the valley, as if unable to weave these new and different people into their stories. And I would meet many of those mostly honest, decent, smart and kind farming folk with my grandfather when we visited their farms to buy sheep, cattle or hens. These people lived insular, often deeply private lives focused on their work. Their voices were rarely heard because they sought no audience. Their identities were constructed from things that couldn't be bought in shops. They wore old clothes and only went shopping occasionally for essentials. They held shop-bought things in great contempt. They preferred cash to credit and would mend anything that broke, piling up old things to use again someday rather than throwing them away. They had hobbies and interests that cost nothing, turning their necessary tasks like catching rats or foxes into sport. Their friendships were built around their work and the breeds of cattle and sheep they kept. They rarely took holidays or bought new cars, and it wasn't all work. A lot of time was spent on farm-related activities that were communal and more relaxed, or in the simple enjoyment of wild things. My grandfather called this way of life living quietly." And then he goes on to say, "There was no shame in having very little," Grandad said. "Quite the opposite. It was better to hold on to their freedoms, even if it meant being poor by modern standards." The constant wanting of shop-bought things he held in disdain. He thought these people had understood something about freedom that everyone else had missed, that if you didn't need things, shop-bought possessions, that you were free from the need to earn the money to pay for them. You couldn't live from a little fell farm if you wanted foreign holidays and fancy meals out all the time. You had to live within your means. After a while, my grandfather lifted himself from his chair, took the newspaper, and we headed out of the door, pausing to look down the valley bottom to our fields, where our sheep grazed and where the becks met in the floodplain. I love that. I don't know why it makes me emotional, it just does. I've read this before and it was fine, but it's weird because it reminds me of me, and yet I was brought up in a very comfortable middle class background, I suppose you could say. Historically that's not where we come from, but my parents worked hard and kind of elevated themselves, I suppose. And I've kind of regressed back to the old times. I mean, I've always been really interested in genealogy and history, and I'm very aware of the kinds of lives that my family's lived. I've already done a couple of trips back over the last 4 or 5 years back up to Cumbria to see some of the little hamlets and the tiny little farmsteads that my families were living in. And these were tough lives, you know, it's mud up to your knees, it's freezing cold in winter, it's hard work. And even now, looking at those little places where the houses are nicer, you know, they've got central heating and electric light and people aren't working the farms, but those little roads were covered in mud and it was freezing cold and it was damp and it was dull, and it just reminded you what tough lives these people were living. And I don't want to go back to all that. I don't want to live in an electric-free, central heating-free life. But, you know, don't get to use a lot of electricity and heating. I switched my heating off back in February, and I hadn't even put it on until December. And it toughens you up, it really does. I'm much tougher than I used to be. And that's a good thing, because it means that, like James's granddad saying about how not spending your money on stuff gives you a different kind of freedom, and I definitely feel a lot freer than I think a lot of people. I'm not tied to credit, I have no debts, I don't have a need, I don't have a want for things, I don't have to go shopping and buy clothes and stuff and upgrade things. And I see the adverts on TV, or I try to avoid the adverts on TV, you know, IKEA telling you you've got to upgrade your sofa and you've got to get a new bed or a new mattress. No, you don't. You just don't. Just don't buy it. You don't need it. They've got you hooked. It's like an addiction. They've got you hooked on buying stuff and feeling that unless you buy new things, unless you get rid of the old stuff and upgrade it and make it new, that you're somehow inadequate. And that is utter rubbish. Stop falling for it. Anyway, that wasn't what I was going to talk about. I talked about the book. I've done the book. So this is a prequel, I suppose, to where I am going soon for my car camping trip, because it's going to be a reminder of, hopefully, some of those old rural ways. I'll have a lot to look at, a lot to talk about when I'm up there, and I'm really excited to be able to get back to something a little bit more basic, a little bit more natural, and away from this horrible towny life that I've found myself stuck in at the moment. Onwards and upwards. It's the day before I'm due to go car camping, and the weather's a bit it's really taken a turn. But I don't fancy changing my plans. I've forgotten that a couple of years ago, a friend of mine gifted me a wax jacket. Proper full-length one, well, 3/4 length. Lovely deep pockets. Perfect condition, fits me well. Ooh. So I'm going to take this with me. Because if I need a waterproof layer, this is literally the only one I own. I've been ransacking the front room, taking the cushions off one of my sofa chairs, which I'm hoping will be enough to deal with the back of the car. That's where it came from. So it's time to head outside and build a bed. Okay, so I'm going to dive straight into this and say this doesn't feel like it's going to go to plan. In my mind, I could visualise the space. I could visualise what I was going to do and how I was going to manage 2 nights in the back of my car. In part, it has gone to plan. I've laid down the blankets that I need. I've put the base of my sofa cushions in, and it does fill the gap, although I think I'd forgotten how small the gap was. But some of the building I think I'm going to have to do when I'm out there, because hanging the curtains and things I can't do before I go because it's going to block all my vision. So I've tried to imagine how some of it might work, and I'm definitely going to be flying by the seat of my pants. I did try and crawl in the back, and it's a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be, so I don't think I'm going to get a good night's sleep. And if it's really bad, I'll have to cut my trip short and just do 1 night, because I don't want to be driving around on motorways feeling absolutely exhausted. But I'm willing to give it a go. Last year, when I tried my first car camping trip, I slept on the passenger seat. I left the back seats of my car up, and the passenger seat will fold flat, and it's just almost just the right length for me. But it's very uncomfortable because one of my major problems is I'm a real fidget. I move a lot. I don't keep still for 5 minutes. So having to lay flat because I couldn't really turn around on the seat was just a nightmare. And I was sleeping up in the North Yorkshire National Park, I think it was, and we had some of the worst weather I've ever known. It was gale force winds, driving rain, and that sound is amplified when you are in a small hatchback. It was unbelievable. So that didn't quite go to plan. But I figure being in the back, although I'm not going to be able to stretch out properly, at least I can move around. At least it'll be softer. I'm going to give it a go. What can I do? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and that's the end of my car camping life. But I have to give it a go. Let's see how we get on.